Welcome everyone to the Outcome Selling Advisory ecosystem. We have folks literally throughout the world joining us on this video call today. And I think it's because the topic is just so fascinating, very topical, business to business value, the elements of value. We've got a special guest in the person to help navigate us through this terrain, the thought leader behind the elements of value, and partner at Bain, Eric Almquist. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you. Let me do a little bit in terms of just some of the content, the flow that we'd like to have with the members today. We're going to really break it up into three sections. So our first section is, I thought it would be good for Eric to have some time to orientate us to the research, the methodology behind the research, also take a moment and introduce the value pyramid for everybody, and let you understand the kind of the levels to the pyramid and some examples. And then with that context or that base foundation, then we're going to open it up for you to have questions of Eric directly about your business, about how this might apply, keep it as free form as possible, but let the members have access to this wonderful provocative research that has been profiled in the Harvard Business Review. And then the third segment at the end is our attempt to kind of bring this to light and kind of wrap it up as a way to make it tangible for you going forward in your customer conversations. So that's kind of the format. Let's, though, do a proper introduction of Eric. Eric and I actually had a chance to first meet back in 2016 in October. His seminal work, and I really encourage everyone to research Eric and his work. His seminal work on elements of value was around business to consumer elements of value, and Eric spoke with me about that back in 2016. Excited now that we can talk about the business-to-business aspects of the elements of value today. 39 years in consumer customer research. 40 years now in customer insights. Partner at Bain, published in the Harvard Business Review. I guess, Eric, where I want to start with my first question would just be, given the decades that you have devoted to this study, what brought you to this field and wanting to study value?
Well, my background originally was in social science, so I've always been interested in people and what makes people tick. And specifically in research, in business research, I've been interested for many decades in how people make decisions, what they value, what they buy again, and all of those basic questions related to revenue. In my opinion, there's kind of an asymmetry in business. It's in business management. It's easier to control the bottom line by reducing costs than it is to control the top line by generating more revenue. And I've spent my whole career on the revenue side of that asymmetry, trying to help our clients improve the top line.
Yeah.
So I got really interested in the concept of value starting about 12 to 15 years ago, and it was kind of a personal quest that it seemed like as we did our studies for our clients, we were always starting from scratch, as if we didn't know anything. And I thought, I should be able to put down on paper some insights about consumers and about B2B customers that we know with some certainty. And that was the genesis of it. And I literally started with a piece of paper that, basically the headline was, what kinds of value are there? And my first term was the sources of value. I later changed that to the elements of value. And that's how it started.
It must be fascinating to tame something like value that could be perceived as amorphous and constantly changing. How did you put an organizing framework around something that seemingly is so...
I'm not sure we've tamed it yet, Chad, but and I always say that we basically say this research is not perfect. We know that. It will change over time. But we do think the elements of value that we've discovered are pretty timeless, that they've always been around in some form, although the value propositions change. The underlying needs are probably universal. But the way we started was really by spending more time with consumers and with B2B decision makers with these questions in mind, and trying to get at the concept of what is actually experience that people consider valuable.
Right.
What is the experience of value? And that's how you should look at the elements of value, is what types of value are delivered or not. And as we proceeded on this, we realized that some types of value were more functional, some people might call them more rational, and some were more emotional. And we began to think about that, and I've been a longtime student of Abraham Maslow. We eventually decided to use the general approach that Maslow used, but to make it more specific to business.
Right.
It really is a theory of human motivation that is, in some sense, it's pretty academic, and we wanted to make it more practical. So that was how we kind of ended up. Was we considered alternatives like the periodic table.
Right.
That didn't seem to be quite that helpful. And I think the good thing about Maslow is that most people who are in business are aware of the hierarchy of needs. So we tried to just make it come to life for their own businesses.
Right, so foundational, water, food, all the
Yeah.
way up to self-actualization and some hierarchy.
Yeah, and in the case of the B2C elements of value, it starts with functional types of value, doing things faster, less expensively, reducing effort,
Right.
those sorts of things. To more emotional ones, the things that have to do with one's personal identity and even the notion of social impact at the top of the pyramid.
So Eric, if we dove in for the members' benefit to the research itself, because everybody's familiar with the wonderful Harvard Business Review article, but maybe take us behind the scenes. What was the methodology to the research and the rigor put to it? Yeah,
so before we actually launched the research, we needed to develop a set of attributes that could measure the elements of value, both on the B2C side and the B2B side. So we followed the same process whereas we went out into the world and talked to a lot of, in the B2B case, a lot of customers of B2B providers.
Right.
A lot of that was in the tech space generally, but we looked at we had interviews with industrial purchasers, all sorts of types of business. We then actually developed and at the same time, we had already identified the elements of value, which on the B2B side, there are 40 elements. 36 of which we actually measure. We don't measure the table stakes because, it's kind of binary. Either you provide that or you're out of business.
Okay.
So there are 36 that we measure. We developed that and we developed the survey. Then we went out to, on the IT side, we went out to roughly 1,200 B2B decision makers, people who are basically from the C-suite down to people who play an important role in purchasing and using IT services. We did similar work on the insurance side. Now we've covered a number of industries, other industries for clients. I can't talk about that research, but the Bain sponsored research was based a total of several thousand B2B decision makers, all of whom went through the survey. It's a relatively short survey.
Mm-hmm.
And we focus on customers of a given company, let's say IBM, in the space that we chose,
Right.
for example. So that, like NPS, Net Promoter Score, the surveys are done among customers. It's not a general image survey among people who are, let's say, non-customers.
Okay, so very robust, customer-driven, their perceptions of value on the provider.
Right.
That manifests itself into this value pyramid.
Right.
Maybe take a moment, Eric, if you can, and talk to the members about the formation of the pyramid, the levels, and even if we can, maybe some examples of companies that excel at different
Sure.
levels.
So on the B2B side, there are a number of levels, starting with table stakes. And the table stakes are things like ethical. So if you are not ethical as a business, sooner or later, you're probably going to be out of business.
Enron.
Enron is a great example, and Arthur Andersen, who lost their license to practice and they were out of business instantly.
Right.
And there are some other basic table stakes. We then have functional elements like kind of the ability to improve the economics of a business or to improve the performance of a business. So that has to do with the quality of products and services that are delivered. Then we have a very important part of the pyramid that is about ease of doing business. And that has to do with productivity, access and availability, relationships, which are incredibly important in the B2B world. And then there are operational and strategic types of value that can be experienced. As you move a level higher in the pyramid, there's one that personally is fascinating to me, which has to do with personal and career value. There are players in the B2B space that actually provide a lot of value to their customers as individuals, either because they become expert in a certain software system, or they are actually being trained. Let's say if you pick GE Aviation, for example, they train a lot of people on maintenance and how to use their Predix platform and so forth and so on. So it actually enhances the individual career of many of those buyers. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, there's one that we call purpose, which has to do with vision, providing hope, and so on, which is really, it's a pretty rarefied group of companies that provide that. But I would argue that the major consulting firms are helping a lot of companies with their visions, and there are some other examples that we'll get into later. Okay,
wonderful. So if I'm a member, I think sometimes if I think of that hierarchy, functional value is the dogfight of the day. In the features, advantage, benefit, trying to get out of that procurement-driven, red ocean, thrashing kinds of conversations. Question would be, and then actually one other thought is, when you looked at this the element of ease of doing business, I wonder if there's a little bit of an Amazon effect, that the business-to-business employee is also a consumer, and some of their expectations on value in their personal lives are starting to make their way into this hierarchy.
Yeah, I think it's our opinion that the day of speeds and feeds is waning. That technology is getting to a point where many providers are very close to each other on the functionality. If you look at the PC world, the chips are so fast, there's so much storage that it's getting harder and harder to differentiate. So we think that next layer up, the area which has to do with ease of doing business, which is about relationships, responsiveness, expertise, knowledge, and so forth, is going to be more important and will probably be the battlefield near term. Obviously, this is going to vary by business, but we do think that that's going to be increasingly important. And sorry, the second part of your question.
Just how do you feel like from your prior work in B2C, has any of the consumer expectations permeated themselves in this new to B2B structure?
There's no question. If you look at, so I had a little piece in HBR about research that people are doing in the B2B space online prior to meeting with vendors. And it's almost universal now that, especially with digital natives, that they will go online long before they call a salesperson or even contact a company. And they get smart, not only about what the company's providing, but what other people think of it, and so forth. And by the way, on the B2C side, we compared Now this is in sort of mass retail, but we looked at the drivers of Net Promoter Score, that is the drivers of customer satisfaction.
Right.
And those actually, we compared 2015 with 2018. And the areas that became more important in that 3-year period are the areas where Amazon is crushing it. So Amazon is actually changing consumer expectations, and people don't partition their brain. They don't say, okay, now I'm at work, so I'm going to expect poorer responsiveness, right? They're bringing that to work, and that's going to continue. And Amazon shows no signs of slowing down.
So a couple things on the mechanics to the pyramid, just so our members have level set. When you are clearing a hurdle and being excellent in a particular element of value, how is that quantified?
So we use the same scale that is used with NPS. It's a 0 to 10 scale for each, and it's whether basically how well does somebody perform on that scale for each of the elements. So we have 36 ratings. We declared, now this is interesting, I'll first give you the answer for B2B and then I'll come back to how it compares to B2C. But in the B2B world, we settled on, for the United States, we settled on if 65% of customers gave a company an 8, 9, or 10, we declared that to be at hurdle. Okay, 65% or more. So now you might think that's a high bar, you might think that's a low bar, but we did a lot of empirical work and we decided that was likely appropriate. In the end, it's arbitrary, but you don't want to have a hurdle that's so low that everybody clears it, or one that's so high that nobody clears it. So what's interesting, though, is the first thing we noticed when we saw the B2B data is all the ratings were higher, all of them, for all providers.
Comparative to the B2C?
To the B2C, and that's why in the B2C world we use 50%, and in the B2B world we use 65%. And the lesson, I think, is that B2B is more competitive, the customer expectations are higher, there's more potential anxiety, there's impact on their careers, there's worry about whether this expensive system or product or machine is going to work.
Right. And
so B2B providers actually have to be better. I don't know what that says about the B2C world. Maybe the lesson is the B2C providers over time are probably going to have to improve as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Couple of other just level setting questions.
Yeah.
So, and I want to test for my understanding. So 65% of the decision makers have to score you 8 or above for you to win that value element.
Right.
And my supposition is, tell me if I'm right or wrong, that as you go up to the pinnacle of this pyramid that we're looking at, that the weighting of that value element is not the same as the ones that are at the bottom level.
That's true. We know generally that the higher you perform on the pyramid, the better. And secondly, the more elements of value that you clear hurdle on, the better. Now, no company is likely going to clear hurdle on all of them. It's too expensive.
Right.
But just to give you a sense, the company in the IT infrastructure space that did better than any other company was Microsoft Azure. They cleared hurdle on 20 of the 36 elements of value. And the equivalent on the B2C side, for those of you who know the company, the highest we've seen is Disney Cruises, which delivers on 17 elements of value. Can't remember if it's 17 or 18, but it's just amazing. Whereas Amazon, let's say, clears on 8.
Wow.
Which is incredible for retail, by the way.
Right. Okay. And now so there is a difference in weighting of value elements as you go higher up the pyramid. Is there any minimum to be considered strong? Like you have to hit a threshold of 6 elements to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for most companies who are performing well, they're probably going to be clearing on at least 6 or 7 elements of value. But just to give you a sense of some of our higher performers, Cisco, for example, I believe their number is 14. GE Aviation, for example, I think is 15 or more. There are some B2B players that are in particularly commoditized categories where the number will be lower.
Right.
But they're maybe still in business because they've, bought up a lot of competitors or have a lot of, let's say, availability in the market or just market power, for example.
Right. I want to bring in the members to ask some questions. Maybe just on that point about Cisco, tell me if I'm thinking about it right, because knowing that they did well on this, I was thinking when you talked about individual value, that a Cisco certified engineer,
right,
that has a whole marketability, career progression concept to it beyond what the router is.
Exactly, and they're at a point where we're now, 25 years into the digital revolution.
Right.
They were there at the beginning, with their servers and so forth, and they've kind of become a standard. They perform well on variety, availability, reach, global reach. So they are in a quite good situation, I think, even this far into the digital revolution. They have a little bit of that IBM. You won't be fired if you buy Cisco.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
yeah.
Well, let's open it up to the members. Tricia, I know you've been monitoring the group chat. Are there any starter questions for Eric, and then we can get to some live questions?
Yes. So both, thank you very much. Very helpful in setting context. And as a reminder for anyone who has any questions, please chat Kasia, or feel free to take yourself off mute and we can begin the Q&A. I have 2 or 3 questions I want to get started with. The first one is, Eric, is there a difference between companies native to the cloud versus those pivoting to the cloud and how they deliver elements of value?
It's a very interesting question. We expected the digital natives to, or I guess the cloud natives, to really perform at the top. And it turned out that was not the case, that actually some of the top providers in the IT infrastructure work we did are companies that have pivoted. So Microsoft started Azure only in 2008, I believe, and yet they deliver on 20 elements of value. 20 elements of value. It was a complete surprise, frankly, even to our IT partners within Bain, that Azure did so well. But what's interesting is that work was done at the beginning of 2017, and Azure gained share over the year. So the elements of value is quite predictive of what happened. Obviously, most people, when they think of a juggernaut company in the cloud, they think of AWS. Now, we concentrated our research more at the larger enterprise level. So maybe that's slightly above Amazon's sweet spot. And the other thing that happened is Microsoft, let me start again. AWS had an outage that spring, not too long before we did the survey, so that might have brought their ratings down. Obviously, an incredible company and delivering tons of value to the market. But the companies like IBM and Azure did very well in that, which was, frankly, a little surprising to your question. Yeah.
Great. Let me ask one more, and then if there's anybody, Kasia, that's lining up, let me know. Could you provide insight or best practices on how to use the value pyramid from a sales perspective when you often do not have access to detailed information inside the customer's organization?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Well, one of the things that we have found a number of clients doing where they don't have information, let's say, on a prospect, or it's a new company that they've never worked with before, is to literally look at the pyramid and to think about, okay, in our meeting, which of these elements do we want to try to, sound credible on, that we have a track record on, that we can deliver on. And it's almost thinking about each individual buyer, what's
Right.
going to appeal to the user versus maybe the head of IT or whoever the person is, to think about the different players and which elements they are likely to be interested in. And I think you can actually almost role play some of this as a sales team. And so even with a law firm that we've done some work with, this is a very large global law firm, they have used the elements of value to help them with their strategy, and they have trained some of their lawyers to actually look at the pyramid before each meeting and say, what value do we think we're going to deliver in this session? So that's a place to start, and you can do that literally without any data. You're going to have to bring a lot of street smarts to that, obviously. But I think, and then if you have some data over time, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, if you have data over time, that can only make that process better.
Okay. There is just a part two to that. I think you touched on it a little bit. Any insights on B2B consensus building inside buying groups with multiple value streams that are not all aligned? So,
yeah, I think the key thing there is and that, by the way, is almost always going to be the case. Not always, but one of the things that makes the B2B world different is not all of the influencers and buyers are the same. They have very different agendas. The CEO may want a visionary product, while the users just want they want it to work every day,
Right.
day in, day out, and work well for them. So maybe those users are interested in more functional types of value, or more performance types of value, let's say. Whereas the higher level executives may be interested in, they may have other agendas as well. It may send a signal about their company that they're using a certain provider.
So Eric, that's an interesting I never thought about that you could look at that value pyramid and then put a lens of stakeholder against it,
Right.
and find that procurement's keeping you in the functional level. Is it fair to say that the research proved out that higher level executives gravitated to more of the emotional, higher elements to the pyramid?
It will be a little bit of a sweeping statement, but I think that's generally true. In fact, one of the things that we've noticed within Bain in the last few years is we find more and more senior executives who are basically our clients, more and more senior executives who are asking the question, what should be the purpose of our business? They're not asking, how can we get more revenue?
Right.
But they're interested in, what is our purpose beyond making money? What difference are we making in the world? And those kinds of questions can be very important for the talent market these days. And, pending a major recession in the near term, the war for talent it's a tough slog at the moment. So
Yeah.
it becomes a very important question for younger people. What company do I want to join with what vision?
And speaking of, like, an example for me would be Mark Benioff and Salesforce.com, this whole model of 1% of the equity to nonprofits, 1% of the product to nonprofits, 1% of the employees' time to nonprofits, that creates that social responsibility
Right.
and vision that's higher in the pyramid.
Yeah, I think Salesforce is a very interesting company in light of the elements of value. If you think of Dreamforce, which is their big meeting in San Francisco,
Right.
I think they bring like 160 or 70,000 people. I don't know where they all stay.
Right.
I guess Airbnb was formed just in time. But this huge conference, and it's all about that individual layer of the pyramid. It's all about training and networking and marketability, and I'm sure that's just the beginning of what Salesforce is doing in that area. But certainly he is trying to appeal to his customers and talent by doing those things that you summarized. Yeah.
Other questions from the members?
Yeah, I'm going to ask one more for a member who could not attend today, and then ask people to chime in here because I don't think we can write them fast enough. So this one is a little context. So the research shows, Eric, that there appears to be a difference in which value elements are most important during the decision-making process, parentheses, cost reduction, versus after decision has been made, the NPS elements. I'm curious to understand what Eric believes is the reason for this change.
It's very interesting. So just to clarify, our research was done among people who had already made the decision. It was not done during this decision process. But we did ask people to state, when thinking about buying, these products, what's most important. And when you ask them, straight up, what's important, they say reducing cost, quality, availability, and reducing risk. So reducing cost is the number one. But we also did some analysis where we derived the importance of the elements in predicting Net Promoter Score. And cost drops to something like 20th in that case. And what on the derived analysis, you see things like product quality being number one, expertise being number two, responsiveness being number three, and hope, believe it or not, is number four. Now, hope is interesting because in the context of IT technology, it can be a nightmare. And all businesses are incredibly dependent on it now, right? We're all digital. And if those systems don't work well, modern technology is giving these buyers hope that all of this is going to be better in the future. And it's obviously improved a lot in the last 30 years.
So where they came in initially with a cost reduction sensitivity,
Yeah.
with more information, context, experience, it dropped dramatically to not even a top 10 item.
Now, I think, obviously when you are buying something for the first time or when you're renewing, the cost topic comes up again, right?
Right.
And one of the things that's, so price is it's a kind of variable. It's easy to see. It's a number or a range. It's easy to haggle about because it's a pretty discrete topic. But I think our research basically says the more value you're delivering, the less you should cave on cost is, I guess, the way to put it.
Right.
And we do know from the B2C side that there's a direct relationship between the number of elements of value one's delivering on and pricing power.
Let's touch on that a little bit,
Yeah.
because I want to, and then I definitely want to get members' involvement, but all of this is for naught if it doesn't have a business impact. And your research showed a correlation between strength in these value elements and loyalty, as well as repeat purchase. Can you share
That's
some of
correct.
those key summary findings with the members?
Yeah, and we found this on both the B2C side and the B2B side. We've found it basically in every industry we've looked at. The more elements of value, I think on the B2B side, as you move from, I've got the numbers here actually, as you move from delivering on no elements of value to 6+ elements of value, NPS goes from 6 to 34, which in the world of NPS, as you know, is a dramatic. And the likelihood of repeat business doubles. We couldn't look at actual revenue growth on the B2B side because we had too few observations. But on the B2C side, especially given our latest update where we now have several hundred companies in the data set, there is pretty much a direct correlation between the number of elements of value you're delivering on and revenue growth, share gain, NPS improvement over time, and pricing power.
Pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, Alex King from Slack, I know you had a question. Did you want to ask it direct?
Sure, I can come on and ask it. Hi, Eric. Thank you for doing this today.
Hi there.
My question is, when you look at the pyramid elements of value here, how do you kind of look at that where you have an organization that has a free product up front, but then kind of transitions into more of an enterprise and paid model? I'd imagine there's some B2C elements and B2B elements that you'd be looking at. So I was just curious if you had perspective there.
Yeah, so you're saying that initially it's free to an individual, but then it becomes an enterprise solution. Did I have that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we have looked at a number of free propositions on the B2C side. So we've looked at companies like Facebook, we've looked at Google, we've looked at Snapchat, et cetera, which are, as to consumers, they're free. They're not free to the advertisers, obviously. But I think if you're thinking about something free to an individual, that is probably more of a B2C elements of value analysis. But as you move towards an enterprise solution, I think you're immediately into the B2B pyramid. And so I guess that's the way I would look at it.
Do you think in that context, if we look at that pyramid, does the business-to-business rational mindset start from the bottom and go up, whereas the consumer emotion-driven person goes from the top down? Or is there
Yeah, I don't think I think that's probably, I mean, it's a very interesting thought, but I think for most product categories, and we've looked at this more on the B2C side, but you have to deliver a number of functional elements to have permission to play higher.
To go up higher.
Right. You know, there have been companies, I won't mention them by name, but there are some apparel companies who've tried to create a kind of sexy lifestyle brand, but actually are not delivering on basic quality.
Right.
And those attempts always die quickly.
Yeah.
You know, my sense is you have to, from the data would say you have to deliver a number of key functional elements before you can play higher up. Well, it'll be interesting to watch Amazon because they're crushing the functional elements. But now they're getting into entertainment, they're getting into, they've got Alexa, they're trying to move up. It'll be interesting to see how far up they can go. They bought Whole Foods, which is
Sure.
obviously a big move in that area.
So functional value is, you have to win. It's the Theranos model, right?
Right.
If it doesn't work, no matter what your social purpose is, it's not going to survive.
Yeah, if my colleague Jamie Cleghorn were here, he can say you can lose on the functional side, but you can't win without the ease of doing business elements of value.
Very interesting.
I hope that helped.
Thank you, Alex, on that. Other questions from the members?
Yeah, Laura Lindsay from Microsoft had a question too, if you want to chime in.
Hi, Laura.
Hi there. Sorry, I was on mute. I actually have two questions. So first of all, thank you so much for speaking. This is pretty awesome. My questions have to do with, you know, have you noticed a difference between like divisions within companies? So for example, you mentioned Azure. Well, Microsoft has 3 primary clouds, Azure and Office and business applications. So that's the first one. The second one is, how do you think about these elements of value and how they influence each other? So those are my 2 questions, please.
These are great questions, and I think you've immediately taken me to the limits of what our data can say. I will talk a little bit about the division one first. We do know that there are companies that have divisions with very different challenges, with very different value systems and sort of business needs. So it could be that what one division is providing to customers is very different from another. I don't know whether that's true of Microsoft. I've always respected Microsoft in my own personal life as a consumer user, and how 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 Microsoft differs by division. That's something we have not studied, but certainly Azure is crushing it. And so I've got to believe there's something in the Microsoft culture, since it was essentially started by, by Microsoft. It's got to be something in the culture that's likely common there. And then the interaction of or the influence of the elements on each other. One of the things we looked at pretty extensively is how much of a halo effect there is among the elements. So if you like a company, let's say you like Apple, or you like Microsoft Azure, do you just give them high ratings on everything? And that turns out not to be true. There are elements of value where Apple is barely registering any ratings at all. Whereas they are delivering on, I think the current number is 12 or 13 elements of value on the consumer side. So in general, the halo effect is lower than one would think. But I do think that there are interactions, and we're probably just beginning to explore this as a team, because now we have several 100,000 observations on the B2C side. But for example, if you're doing well on something like design and aesthetics or fun and entertainment, you have a higher likelihood to be performing, let's say, on self-actualization among consumers. Can't comment on the business side, but as we get, it'll be an interesting question to test as we get more data. What are the interactions among these elements of value? I'm sorry I can't answer it with any precision at the moment.
Thank you, Laura. On that question, let me take a reverse angle. Can you be over excellent in a particular level of the pyramid where you gold plate it? You try to do everything, all the icons in that level, and maybe you should only do 3 out of 5 and try to move up. Like, what's the right way to think about that?
I think we can't be formulaic about it at this point, but we do know that Amazon has kind of taken that strategy, whether they knew it or not. What's interesting is that Bezos, in his shareholder calls, spends about half the time talking about customer satisfaction. And if you look at our data on Amazon, it is clear that they are just making people's lives easier by taking out all those compromises of going to a retail store, not finding the color you want or the size you want, having to go back or go to another store, and traffic is not getting any easier. And it's just so much. I mean, I recently bought a bread box from Amazon. If I had to find that bread box somewhere, it probably would have taken me a month, right? Because it's way out in the tail, right? And so it's made our lives easier at the functional level.
Right.
There are many ways to win here. You can do a few functional elements and then hit on a couple of the higher ones. Some players have gone all functional. And then there are some companies like, I've talked about Leica before with you, Chad. They are kind of playing up and down the pyramid. Their quality is probably the highest,
Supreme.
But on the other hand, their prices are are pretty much the highest as well.
Right.
But they're playing on self-actualization and other things. Plus, they have more of a niche market that they're going after.
Excellent.
Okay. How about Tim from Workday?
Yeah, I thought Tim was going to join because he and I have had some great conversations on this. Tim leads a value management practice at Workday, Eric, and had some questions.
Eric, thank you for your time, first and foremost. The question I had was around, as you move up the pyramid, right, functional value, it can make an argument it's easier to differentiate from a competitive point of view, right, and probably show tangible proof around how you differentiate. So as you move into more subjective elements of value where they can be somewhat more abstract, how have you seen organizations differentiate from a competitive point of view in that arena?
Well, they can be abstract, but my Salesforce example earlier is pretty concrete. They've got the largest corporate meeting in the world, or customer meeting in the world, as far as I know. Maybe there's a bigger one in China, and they have all of this. They have training, as far as I know. I believe they have certification. They have networking events, all of which are playing in the individual element layer of the pyramid, and those are pretty concrete. So I would caution you against thinking of the higher order elements are more abstract, but they do have to be experienced. So it's hard, for example, I'll just talk about Bain, for example. Bain has a very strong culture. We have a very particular way of working, and if we are talking to a new client, a brand new client, which we don't actually do all that often, but sometimes we do, they don't have an experience of what it's like to work with the Bain team. And so we try to bring that alive through video. We try to make sure they get references from other people who have been customers. That's very, very important. We try to get a Bain promoter to talk to a new prospect. So some of these can be they can be hard to communicate if people haven't experienced it before.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I just saw one recently that I want to test whether this is something I'm seeing or if it truly is happening. So Grainger, business to business, industrial products, manufacturing, kind of the heart of B2B manufacturing.
Yep.
Their recent value positioning has been nothing about the Grainger product, but about this persona for the person who gets the job done, where they're trying to create this identity value of the guy who's running the production line, and if that line goes down, so does the whole business, and I'm the person who gets the job done, and Grainger knows me, so I know Grainger, they're part of me.
Yeah.
That feels very much like an individual value, not a functional value.
I think what they're trying to do there is reduce anxiety and reduce risk. And those are emotional, and reducing anxiety is emotional, reducing risk is more functional. But frankly, I think I always caution people when talking about how companies are promoting themselves, because people have to experience that value.
Right.
But Grainger is an interesting company. I'll take a look at that, and to the extent that is holding up in the experience of value among their customers, I think it's probably quite a good strategy, actually.
Let's talk about, just to Tim's point, about what could be seemingly a little abstract up at the higher levels, like anxiety. But my supposition would be, in a business-to-business setting, anxiety is far more pervasive. You and I have I'm going to take you out to lunch afterwards. If we have a bad meal, we're out a couple bucks. If I have a bad implementation on a mission-critical application, I'm out of a job.
Yeah. I actually think of all the elements, anxiety reduction is one of the more underrated ones. I think it's a very powerful element of value. IBM rode that horse for a long time. We'll take care of you. You won't get fired by hiring IBM. My son, who works for a online retailer in San Francisco, recently hired a firm to help them with their Shopify application. They were redesigning their website. And I experienced his anxiety with this process. It was not going well, and they were not being responsive. He has an eye for detail, and they did not. They didn't seem to care. It just got dragged on. Finally, he had to basically fire them and hire a number one. And this is 25 years after web development started, right? I mean,
should be able to get this right.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would happen often, but the level of anxiety that he felt was pretty high, and he was working nights and weekends trying to make it work. He was probably working harder than the vendor was. And that is not how it should be. And he found somebody who was competent. It's all done now, and he's relaxed.
Right.
But I think we've all experienced, I think, that in a B2B setting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to thank you. So let's do one more question from Bill Stope from IBM, and then I think anything else we'll have to follow up. So Bill, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hi, Bill.
The question I had was, I'm wondering, do you see any kind of changes happening or being necessary to traditional organization structures to better meet the subjective and personal elements of value for different buying roles? So, for example, should businesses, not think in terms of traditional P&Ls, but maybe P&Ls by buying audience, where you're starting to blend your business portfolio to meet the needs of specific buyers, and therefore, to have a better chance of delivering the subjective and personal elements of value?
It's a very interesting question. We have not done any work on that on the B2B side yet, but we're aware of it. We do know that there can be a major organizational disconnect between a CEO's promise of value, if you will, and what the actual troops are delivering or trying to deliver. So we know that that's an issue. And I will say that on the B2C side now for many years, some B2C organizations are organizing by customer segment. So it could be in banking, it's mass affluent, high net worth, private banking, et cetera. And they are organized around those segments. I do think that is definitely a possibility on the B2B side. And if my colleague Jamie were here, he might have examples, but he's on vacation in London. So that's something we might get back to you, Bill, on if that would be helpful. But I think it's an excellent question.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you,
Bill. What just a fantastic conversation. We are running a little bit behind, and there's a list of questions still, so.
We can get back to some of them.
What I'd like to do is, if anybody does have a question, please chat it to or send it directly to Kasha, and we will make sure Eric is not going away.
He's actually going to be joining our advisory, and so what an elite group that we're making you a part of. We're thrilled to have you. And I think if I could maybe try to wrap everything up into kind of a final question,
Sure.
Chad, for you to help conclude us is what's a way that we could apply what we went through today with the B2B elements of value in my next customer conversation, in my next prospect conversation? How does that work?
Great, excellent, very tangible. And I should reference, we are so honored. So Eric will be a member of the Ecosystem Advisory and hopefully a source of wisdom and knowledge as we continue to come back to these issues and as the research matures over time. To that overarching question of, how do I take a pragmatic next step? So Ecosystems and Eric and Bain are in the stages of partnering, where we in essence are going to be taking these value elements. So think about that pyramid, the value pyramid structure, and now think about being able to click into any of those value elements and be able to serve up on demand a template. So maybe kind of a couple of tangible examples to our earlier discussion. Maybe here we go. So we click into a template like the graphical template here around anxiety, and we pull up an example of how the actual template could be used. So under anxiety, it could be something like professional implementation with assurances. So here we have an image of the, here we go. So we pull up an image here and we have all the value elements. So this is going to be a platform that's available to all the members going forward and something we want to pilot with certain key members. But you'll see here on the left-hand side of the screen, these are the various different levels to the value pyramid of Eric's research work. And in this example, maybe we want to activate individual value. We want to go in and have a thoughtful conversation. And maybe we're focused on, our prior discussion was on anxiety and how perhaps our executive is anxious on, am I going to get the value that is being promised? And how am I sure of that? And in this case, we could pull up a best practice template that would show performance guarantees and outcomes and a sequence of events that would allow you to be able to have that kind of de-risking conversation with a particular customer. Or you could go back to the library and in this case click inspirational value. Maybe you're trying to go even higher up on the pyramid to something that is around social responsibility, and you want to show how your partnership will be able to quantify the carbon reduction of a particular relationship that you're having with one of your key accounts. You'll be able to access a template like this to be able to quantify and show that impact. So it's very early stage. Eric and I and the teams are working, but think about this as an ability to dynamically pull up this outstanding, robust research, be able to pull down a template for an interactive conversation with a customer, and be able to determine how well you're doing and whether it's being perceived as value or not. I'd love, Eric, any thoughts you have on the partnership?
No, I think it's I think it's great. We're still working through the details, but this is exactly the sort of thing that we would love to do.
Yep.
Because it also could give us access to data for our research as well.
That's right, and make it something more robust over time. So for any member that is interested in the pilot process, the next steps on this will be to contact Kasia. Kasia is our executive director. She runs the advisory for us. So if you have interest as a member to be part of this kind of pioneering work where we take all that research and value pyramid content and port it into the member platform and use it for specific customer conversations, please let us know and we'll start to reach out with you individually. Well, let me close out. I know we're at our full hour. First, let me just thank all the members for the quality of the questions. You never disappoint. Highly engaging, great, thoughtful questions. I think to Eric's point and to Trisha's point, we'll make sure that if it wasn't specifically answered here, that we will get you back answers to your questions. So feel encouraged that we'll get you the answers from Eric's perspective. And then I want to thank Eric. It's always a pleasure. We've had 2 sit-downs together. I am endlessly fascinated by this topic, and the concept of value and the structure you've put to it is inspiring. So we look forward to our work together.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you.